Woody Allen wanted to shoot Manhattan in color, like every other romantic comedy. Then, Gordon Willis, the cinematographer who made The Godfather look like oil paintings, convinced him to use black and white film that hadn't been used for a major studio movie in 15 years. The result was the most beautiful film ever made about New York City, and a visual revolution that changed how movies could look in the late 70s. But before we dive into this story, if you enjoy untold moments from cinema history, hit that subscribe button and stay with us. It was March 7th, 1978, a cold, overcast Tuesday morning in Manhattan, with gray clouds hanging low over the city and a persistent March wind cutting through the urban canyons between towering skyscrapers. Woody Allen sat in the luxuriously appointed offices of United Artists on West 57th Street, studying test footage from his upcoming film Manhattan, that looked absolutely nothing like the cinematic vision he'd been developing in his mind for months. The color cinematography spread across the viewing screen was disappointingly flat, uninspiring, and made New York City, the most visually dynamic urban environment in America, look like any generic American metropolitan area, rather than the romantic urban paradise and intellectual cultural center that Woody desperately wanted to capture and celebrate through cinema. The film was conceived as Woody's most personal and ambitious love letter to his hometown, a sophisticated romantic comedy that would showcase the intellectual richness, cultural sophistication, and unique romantic possibilities of Manhattan life in ways that no previous movie had successfully achieved or even attempted. But the early test shots and preliminary cinematography suggested that his carefully developed artistic vision wasn't translating effectively to the screen through conventional filmmaking approaches that treated New York as just another location, rather than as a character central to the story. Woody had been working with various cinematographers throughout his directorial career, experimenting with different visual approaches and technical strategies. But he'd never found a collaborator who truly understood his distinctive artistic sensibility or could successfully translate his neurotic intellectual comedy into sophisticated visual language that enhanced rather than competed with his dialogue-driven storytelling approach. The cinematographers he'd worked with were technically competent and professionally experienced, but they approached his films as simple comedies requiring basic functional photography, rather than as opportunities for visual artistry that could elevate the material into something approaching cinematic poetry. That's when Mike Medavoy, a senior executive at United Artists who had been following Woody's career development with considerable interest and investment, made a suggestion that would fundamentally transform not only Manhattan, but Woody's entire approach to filmmaking for decades to come. "You need to work with Gordon Willis," Medavoy told Woody during an increasingly tense meeting about the film's visual problems. "He's the finest cinematographer working in American cinema today. If anyone can solve your visual problems and create the look you're envisioning, it's Gordon." Gordon Willis was indeed considered one of the most talented, innovative, and uncompromising artists working in Hollywood during the 1970s. A cinematographer who had revolutionized film lighting and visual storytelling through his groundbreaking work on Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather and The Godfather Part II. His innovative use of shadows, dramatic low-light photography, and sophisticated composition had earned him the industry nickname the Prince of Darkness for his willingness to use minimal lighting and deep shadows in ways that created mood and atmosphere that most cinematographers avoided as technically risky or commercially unacceptable. Gordon's work on The Godfather had demonstrated how cinematography could be used not just to document action, but to create emotional atmosphere and thematic meaning through purely visual elements. His lighting and composition choices had made those films look like Renaissance oil paintings brought to life, establishing new standards for cinematic artistry. But Gordon was also widely known throughout the industry for being extraordinarily difficult to work with, demanding complete creative control over his cinematographic choices and completely unwilling to compromise his artistic vision to accommodate directors who didn't understand the technical and creative aspects of cinematography, or producers who were concerned primarily with commercial considerations and budget limitations. When Gordon first met with Woody to discuss the Manhattan Project, their initial conversation immediately revealed fundamental disagreements about how the film should look, feel, and function as cinematic art, rather than simply as commercial entertainment. Woody had originally envisioned bright, colorful cinematography that would make Manhattan appear warm, inviting, and contemporary. The kind of visual approach that would appeal to mainstream audiences expecting conventional romantic comedy imagery featuring attractive people in attractive settings. But Gordon believed the film required a completely different and much more sophisticated visual approach that would transform it from simple entertainment into lasting cinematic art that could be studied and appreciated decades after its initial release. You're making a movie about nostalgia, memory, and the romantic idealization of urban life, Gordon told Woody during their first extended meeting in Woody's Fifth Avenue apartment, surrounded by jazz records and clarinet cases that reflected his obsession with earlier eras of American culture. Color cinematography makes everything look immediate, contemporary, and ordinary, Gordon continued, developing his argument with the systematic precision that characterized his approach to all creative problems. If you want this film to feel like a genuine love song to the city, something that captures the romance and sophistication you're writing about, you need black and white photography. Woody was initially resistant to Gordon's suggestion for several practical and artistic reasons. Black and white cinematography hadn't been used for a major studio romantic comedy since the early 1960s, when the industry had largely abandoned monochrome photography in favor of color processes that were considered more modern, commercially appealing, and technically sophisticated. Contemporary audiences expected color films, particularly for light entertainment and romantic comedies, and United Artists executives were understandably concerned that black and white photography would make the movie feel dated, pretentious, or uncommercial in ways that could seriously damage its box office potential and critical reception. But Gordon was both persistent and passionate about his vision for the film. He argued systematically and persuasively that black and white photography would transform Manhattan from a simple romantic comedy into something approaching visual poetry, creating the kind of timeless, elegant imagery that would make New York City itself a central character in the film, rather than simply a background setting. Gordon spent several hours showing Woody carefully selected examples of classic black and white films from the 1930s and 40s, sophisticated urban comedies and romantic dramas by directors like Billy Wilder, William Wyler, and George Stevens that had used monochrome photography to create mood, atmosphere, and visual sophistication that color cinematography couldn't achieve. He demonstrated how black and white photography eliminated visual distractions and unnecessary details that could compete with performance and dialogue, forcing audiences to focus on composition, lighting, character relationships, and the emotional content of scenes, rather than being distracted by costume colors, set decoration, or background elements that didn't serve the story. More importantly for Woody's artistic ambitions, Gordon argued convincingly that black and white cinematography would give Manhattan the kind of serious artistic legitimacy and visual sophistication that would separate it from typical Hollywood romantic comedies and establish Woody definitively as a serious filmmaker and visual artist, rather than simply as an entertainer or comedy writer who happened to direct his own material. The decision to use black and white was ultimately Woody's to make, but it required him to convince United Artists executives, who were genuinely nervous about the commercial implications and potential audience resistance to such an unusual and potentially risky choice for a contemporary romantic comedy targeting mainstream audiences. Woody developed a systematic argument for the black and white approach, emphasizing that the unconventional cinematography would give the film a unique visual identity that would generate significant positive critical attention and word-of-mouth marketing that could potentially offset any initial audience resistance to the monochrome approach. He also pointed out that several recent European films had successfully used black and white photography for contemporary stories, suggesting that American audiences might be more receptive to the approach than studio executives feared, particularly if the visual quality was sufficiently sophisticated and the storytelling remained accessible and entertaining. United Artists eventually approved the black and white cinematography after considerable internal discussion and consultation with marketing executives, partly because the decision would actually reduce production costs significantly. Black and white film stock was substantially less expensive than color film, and lighting requirements were generally less complicated and time-consuming. Once the black and white decision was finalized, Gordon began developing a specific visual strategy for Manhattan that would systematically showcase the city's architectural beauty and romantic possibilities, while creating intimate, emotionally compelling imagery for the character relationships and dialogue scenes. Gordon's comprehensive cinematographic approach was built around the fundamental concept of Manhattan as a romantic urban paradise, using dramatic lighting techniques and carefully planned composition to transform familiar New York locations into something approaching cinematic poetry that would feel both realistic and romantically idealized. His technical strategy involved using wide establishing shots to showcase the city's architectural grandeur, the soaring Art Deco skyscrapers, the geometric patterns created by streets and avenues, the organic curves and natural beauty of Central Park, while using intimate close-ups and medium shots to capture the neurotic vulnerability of Woody's character and the complex emotional dynamics of his various romantic relationships. The famous opening sequence, featuring Woody's character walking through different Manhattan neighborhoods while delivering an extended voiceover monologue about his complicated love affair with the city, was meticulously planned and shot using a series of carefully choreographed wide shots that showcased different landmarks, architectural styles, and urban environments in ways that emphasized their visual poetry, rather than simply documenting their geographic reality or tourist appeal. Gordon's sophisticated lighting approach created dramatic contrast between light and shadow that gave even mundane interior locations a sense of visual sophistication and emotional depth that elevated them far beyond typical comedy cinematography. Restaurant scenes became intimate and romantically atmospheric. Apartment interiors felt warm and intellectually stimulating, and exterior shots transformed ordinary Manhattan streets into elegant stages for sophisticated adult drama. The cinematography also specifically enhanced Woody's performance and screen presence by using strategic lighting and careful composition to emphasize his character's simultaneous intellectual pretensions and emotional vulnerability. Close-up shots were lit to reveal both confidence and deep insecurity, while wide shots positioned him within the urban landscape in ways that suggested both his profound connection to the city and his psychological isolation within its vast social complexity. Gordon's most technically innovative achievement was creating a distinctive visual style that made 1970s Manhattan appear timeless rather than obviously contemporary. The black and white photography eliminated the fashion trends, interior design styles, and consumer products that would have immediately dated the film, creating imagery that felt simultaneously modern and classic in ways that would allow the film to age gracefully, rather than becoming a period piece. The film's romantic scenes benefited enormously from Gordon's sophisticated approach to intimate cinematography. The famous sequence featuring Woody and Diane Keaton sitting on a bench overlooking the Queensboro Bridge at dawn became one of cinema's most iconic romantic images, combining spectacular urban architecture with intimate character interaction in ways that enhanced both the visual grandeur and the emotional authenticity. Similarly, the various scenes shot in Central Park used dramatic natural lighting and careful composition to transform the familiar location into something approaching cinematic fantasy, creating the impression that Manhattan was a magical place where sophisticated romance and meaningful intellectual conversation were not only possible, but inevitable for people sensitive enough to appreciate the city's cultural offerings. Gordon's cinematography also served Woody's distinctive comedic sensibility by using visual irony and sophisticated contrast to enhance jokes and character observations. Formal, elegant compositions would frame neurotic behavior and social awkwardness, creating visual humor that complemented rather than competed with the dialogue-based comedy that remained central to Woody's artistic approach. When Manhattan was finally released to theaters in April 1979, critics immediately recognized that something extraordinary and unprecedented had been achieved in terms of cinematography and visual storytelling. The black and white photography was universally praised as innovative, sophisticated, and extraordinarily beautiful in ways that elevated the entire film far beyond typical romantic comedy entertainment. Roger Ebert, who would become one of Woody's most consistent and perceptive critical supporters, specifically praised Gordon Willis's cinematography as pure poetry in black and white, noting that the cinematographer had created visual imagery that made Manhattan feel simultaneously like both a completely real place that audiences could visit and a romantic dream that existed primarily in the imagination. Vincent Canby of the New York Times, the most influential film critic in American journalism, called Manhattan the most beautiful film about New York ever made, and praised Gordon Willis's cinematography as a major artistic achievement that demonstrated how technical innovation could enhance rather than overwhelm sophisticated storytelling. The critical consensus was that Gordon's visual approach had transformed what could have been a simple romantic comedy into something approaching cinematic art, proving that contemporary films could achieve the kind of visual sophistication and artistic legitimacy that critics usually associated with classic Hollywood productions from the 1930s and 40s. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences nominated Gordon Willis for Best Cinematography, recognizing the significant technical and artistic achievement of creating such sophisticated and emotionally compelling imagery for a contemporary romantic comedy that easily could have been shot using conventional, functional approaches. The nomination was particularly significant because it represented Hollywood's official recognition that innovative cinematography could be a crucial element in elevating genre entertainment into serious artistic achievement worthy of critical attention and industry respect. More importantly for Woody's long-term career development, the extraordinary success of Manhattan's visual approach established him definitively as a serious filmmaker, rather than simply as a comedy entertainer or television writer who happened to direct his own material. The cinematography gave his work immediate artistic credibility and cultural legitimacy that influenced how critics, audiences, and industry professionals perceived his subsequent films and artistic ambitions for decades to come. The collaboration between Woody and Gordon continued successfully through several additional films, including Stardust Memories and A Midsummer Night's Sex comedy, helping to establish the distinctive visual foundation for Woody's unique cinematic style that would influence his approach to filmmaking for the rest of his career. Their continued partnership proved that the Manhattan cinematographic success wasn't an isolated achievement, but rather the beginning of a sustained creative relationship that could produce consistently sophisticated visual results when both artists were committed to the same artistic goals. The technical influence of Manhattan cinematography extended far beyond Woody's personal career to impact how romantic comedies, urban films, and character-driven dramas were photographed throughout the following decades. The black and white approach inspired countless filmmakers to consider unconventional visual strategies for contemporary stories, rather than simply accepting the default assumption that modern films required color cinematography to be commercially viable or artistically acceptable. Contemporary directors including Noah Baumbach, Jim Jarmusch, Alexander Payne, and countless independent filmmakers have specifically cited Manhattan cinematography as directly influential in their own work, demonstrating how Gordon Willis's innovative approach continued to impact cinema and visual storytelling decades after its original creation. The film's visual techniques became standard reference material for cinematography students and professional filmmakers studying how lighting, composition, and film stock choices could be used to create specific emotional atmospheres and enhance character development through purely visual elements. Film schools began teaching Gordon Willis's Manhattan cinematography as a masterclass in how technical innovation could serve storytelling rather than simply providing visual spectacle, and how collaboration between directors and cinematographers could produce results that neither artist could achieve working independently. The cinematography also influenced commercial advertising, fashion photography, and other visual media that adopted similar black and white approaches for contemporary subjects, demonstrating how cinematic innovations could impact broader visual culture beyond the film industry itself. Modern digital cinematography and color correction technology have made it much easier for contemporary filmmakers to achieve similar visual effects. But Gordon Willis's Manhattan work continues to be studied as an example of how to use purely photographic techniques rather than post-production manipulation to create sophisticated imagery. The film's enduring popularity and critical reputation have made it a constant reference point for discussions about the relationship between visual style and narrative content, proving that technical innovation can enhance rather than overwhelm character-driven storytelling when approached with sufficient intelligence and artistic sensitivity. Today, Manhattan is routinely listed among the most visually beautiful films ever made, not just in American cinema, but in world cinema. And Gordon Willis's cinematography is taught in film schools internationally as an example of how cinematographic innovation can transform conventional genre material into lasting artistic achievement. The film's visual influence can be seen in countless contemporary films, television shows, commercials, and music videos that use similar black and white approaches, dramatic urban lighting, and romantic composition techniques that trace their origins directly to Gordon Willis's work on Manhattan. The collaboration between Woody Allen and Gordon Willis proved conclusively that creative risks in cinematography could enhance rather than compromise commercial entertainment, and that sophisticated visual approaches could successfully find mainstream audiences when integrated intelligently with compelling characters and sophisticated storytelling. The success also demonstrated that audiences were more receptive to innovative visual techniques than many studio executives assumed, encouraging other filmmakers to experiment with unconventional approaches rather than automatically accepting industry conventional wisdom about what would be commercially acceptable. The partnership established important principles about artistic collaboration that influenced how many subsequent directors approached working relationships with cinematographers, emphasizing creative dialogue and shared artistic vision, rather than simply technical execution of predetermined visual concepts. The Manhattan cinematography achievement also proved that contemporary films could successfully evoke the visual sophistication and romantic atmosphere of classic Hollywood productions without simply copying or imitating earlier techniques, showing how innovation could honor tradition while creating something genuinely original. Gordon Willis's willingness to advocate persistently for his black and white vision, despite initial resistance from both Woody and studio executives, demonstrated the importance of technical specialists maintaining their artistic convictions, even when working on commercial projects with significant financial pressures and market expectations. The cinematographer who convinced Woody Allen to abandon color photography and embrace black and white created one of cinema's most enduring and influential visual achievements, while proving that the most innovative and lasting art often emerges from rejecting conventional approaches in favor of creative vision, artistic courage, and willingness to take calculated risks that serve the story rather than simply following established industry practices. The legacy of their collaboration continues to influence filmmakers worldwide who understand that cinematography can be much more than simply functional documentation of action and dialogue, but rather a crucial creative element that can transform good material into lasting artistic achievement that continues to inspire and educate future generations of visual storytellers. The Manhattan Project also established important precedents about the relationship between artistic ambition and commercial success, proving that audiences were often more sophisticated and receptive to innovative approaches than studio marketing departments assumed, and that taking creative risks could actually enhance, rather than compromise, a film's commercial appeal. The enduring popularity and critical reputation of Manhattan, now more than 40 years after its release, demonstrates that Gordon Willis's cinematographic innovations created something genuinely timeless that continues to look fresh and sophisticated to contemporary audiences who encounter it for the first time. If this story gave you a new perspective, there's more coming. Hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next Untold moment.